You are listening to a White Phosphorus Pictures podcast.
Broadcasting under the night sky from the edge of an undisclosed jungle on the Gulf of Mexico, I'm Christopher Garitano, your voice in the night. For the next hour, allow me to be your guide into the bizarre unknown, the fantastic macabre, and together we'll journey to that borderland between fiction and reality, a place beyond all rational explanation. We are now off to the witch. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Off to the Witch newsletter. For those of you who are just coming into the show, the newsletter is an alternate version of the show. I don't have a guest on these weeks, but I do discuss a theme, and a theme that's interesting to me. I try to bring something unique to the table with all of these newsletters. It's not going to ever be typical. And even the discussion of something as popular as the Amityville Horror is going to go a little bit deeper into thought and how these things affect us, how ghost stories affect us. You know, we've had about 20 years of the same ghost show on television, and personally, I disagree. That is not how you tell a ghost story. That is not how ghost stories were told throughout history, and it's wearing very thin to see a bunch of people walk inside a house with fake night vision cameras and walk around and look scared and pretend like they're scared when nothing is actually happening. I do believe hauntings are real. I've experienced them myself. I don't know exactly what they are. And one of the most popular hauntings, especially one that I grew up with, I would say the mother of modern ghost stories that take place in a home, okay, in suburbia, and something that most people see as benign, their house, the house where their family is. A lot of people have experienced this. But in the case of the Amityville Horror, you know, it hit me when I was a kid. Not only was the house 15 minutes from my house growing up, I think that it was less about that and more about the family dynamic being shattered. This particular ghost story is introduced with something very real. And personally, it's the greatest mystery and the most mysterious aspect of the folklore of the Amityville Horror is Ron Butch Defeo killing his entire family. Now, before I get to the details of that, for those of you who don't know, and we'll go over the details, you know, I'm busy making the very first feature-length chapter in my new series. And I'm calling the series Off to the Witch Presents, but each of the chapters stand on their own legs. The very first chapter is called A Haunting We Will Go. You know, frankly, my goal with this, on the fun side of things, was to make the ultimate Halloween special. But going deeper into details, it's more than that. And the idea began with, you know, my experience, after my experiences making an episode of Strange World, which I had such a unique take on it. There were certain people involved that were really trying to push that episode into a typical arena. And I didn't want that. And as unique as it still stands, it's my least favorite episode of the series I made for Discovery Travel Channel. Here's my issue with this. We don't know, no matter how many devices you can carry in your hand, you don't truly know what a haunting is. We don't know what it is yet. And there are very few people who have explored the subject matter over the years to try and understand what this is and even try and replicate it. So in A Haunting We Will Go, one thing I don't do is that I don't promise any evidence whatsoever, because no matter how many attempts over the years to get a reading or to get a spike or an EVP, electronic voice phenomena, I don't know if it stands as proof. To a lot of us, it does. But it doesn't stand as unanimous proof of anything. that there is some kind of phenomena happening. But is it proof of the afterlife? Have we proven that we go on? Most of us believe that we do, including myself. But is it proven? Is it unanimously proven? Perhaps we have to adjust our perspective and our definition of what proof is, because there are, millions upon millions of eyewitness accounts through history that have all seen something, some kind of ghostly image, some kind of apparition, a poltergeist, activity in their homes, whispering. I experienced that myself. But why can't we all agree that there is some kind of alternate existence, that there's another plane of existence, that we go on after this physical death? We're in extraordinary times right now. And during these times where we're learning and opening our minds to new definitions to our existence, that I think we can go back to older ghost stories, even the most popular ones like the Amityville Horror, and re-examine it with a fresh mind. So there is a segment in A Haunting We Will Go that I regard the impact that the Amityville Horror had on me as a kid. My family is comprised of 3 boys, 1 girl, mother, father, and that dynamic stayed throughout my childhood, and we all lived in a house. It was during that time that I experienced the Amityville Horror, the film, and learned more about it watching an old In Search Of episode with Leonard Nimoy explaining it. The atmosphere was created. And so a haunting, I think the lesser regarded effect of a haunting is the one in your imagination, is how it lives in your mind, whether it be a personal experience that you've had or that you've simply read or saw a ghost story portrayed in one form or another, is that it's in your memory. I think that's the most haunting aspect of it. I think whether it be a personal experience or you're simply hearing a ghost story, is that the feelings from that are transferred into your imagination. And that's what truly lives on. Now, is there some kind of quantum spike that happens when you watch horror films or particularly ghost stories? Could it inspire the phenomena of a haunting, which we still don't know exactly what that is? And during that time, I was immersed in not only ghost stories, but horror films and even the occult. I was reading books about spells and things like that. I was a kid, And when you have access to that section in the library, and I did, or visiting the bookstore, it's like discovering a whole new universe. That barrier that's usually created with fiction is broken, because each of these tomes, or even the book, The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, right on the cover, it says, a true story. And especially for a kid who's quite impressionable and who's already interested in these things, to hear that these things are real blew my mind as a kid. It blows my mind now. And these days, I see a lot of people on the internet making, I would say, the most outrageous claims you could possibly think of. Things that were in the tallest order of fiction are on a daily basis. There are people claiming that they are seeing mythical creatures left and right. Still no evidence of it at all. And I'm not entirely doubting it, but I do think quite a few of those people are running a racket. I love good stories. And when I hear one, there's authenticity to it. There's something to it. And the person telling the tale was affected by this experience, and you can tell. You could tell the difference between someone running a racket and someone who was truly affected by something that maybe feels safe now to get it off their chest. On the case of the Amityville Horror, during that time, of course, there was no internet. And this story began with a family, living the American dream. They moved in from urban environment, and the Defeo family, they purchased this house, this Dutch colonial house 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. It was the house itself was built in 1925, and they had such dreams. Now, there were parts of this family that were a bit dysfunctional. Father and son relationship between Ron Defeo Sr. and Jr., which they call Butch. There was a dynamic in the family that is common amongst a lot of families that stay together in a home. And often the eldest son doesn't get along with the father. In a lot of cases, I suppose it's defiance. Ron Defeo Jr. got in a lot of trouble. He was a drug addict. He was a criminal. And his father still wanted to wield the discipline that a father of the day did. And what happened after, no matter how it was explained over the years, no matter how many people try to give it a definition or a reason, it doesn't matter. It's still a mystery. I've heard people say that Ron Defeo Jr. murdered his entire family for insurance money. It just doesn't make sense to me. And what happened was, on November 13th, 1974, at about 3 a.m., Ron Defeo Jr., walked through his home, his family home, with a Marlin rifle and killed every single member of his family. He killed Ron Sr., his father, his mother Louise, his sisters Dawn and Allison, and his young brothers Mark and John. All in their beds. They were all found in their beds, laying face down. The thing that caught my eye looking at these photos as a kid in Jay Anson's book and some of the newspaper clippings, and even today, is that sign in front of the house that reads High Hopes. The Defeos, when they moved in, put that sign up. Just like any family, they weren't perfect. And you can try and put any explanation to this. But no matter how much you want to say, well, it was Butch fighting with his father. Oh, he was trying to get the insurance money from the family. He was a drug addict. Look, you can compare that situation to a million other scenarios that are tantamount, and it still doesn't add up to the eldest son walking through the house with a rifle, killing every single person in the family. If he had a dispute with his dad, those cases usually end with him killing his father, but never his little sisters, his little brothers, and his mother. That requires something else. And the reason why this remains a mystery to me is because after Ron Defeo was accosted by police, he changed his story maybe 30 times over the years until his death. One of the things he brought into the trial was that he was hearing voices, was that he was possessed. He was hearing voices to tell him to kill his family in that house. And it's odd because then that story was dismissed, and he told 15 different scenarios that included his mother was involved, she shot everybody, his sister Dawn was involved, she shot everybody, and then he found her committing the murders and killed her. The story changed over and over again, and every single one of those stories were debunked. And then at the very end, he came full circle again with the original story he was telling during his trial. And Ron Defeo died only a couple of years ago, and we're never really going to know exactly what happened that night or why. You can put any explanation to it that you want to, but I think the story of Ron Defeo murdering his entire family and the fact that there was an entire family of people murdered in that house, that if you believe in evil, that the level of evil was so extreme that night that he killed every single member of his family. And of course, this has happened before throughout history. But the mystery remains. And I don't believe that the story of the haunting subsequently that came after with the Lutz family would have the impact that it did without these murders happening in the house. And of course, some say that George Lutz was aware of the murders in the house, and he concocted a ghost story to bank on. Okay, well, my issue with that is the murders happened in 1974. And the Lutz family moved in just about 1 year later, almost exactly, a year and 1 month later. They moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. The Lutz family stayed for 28 days. And during that time, they claim there were a variety of things that were comparable to poltergeist activity. They were hearing voices. They were having terrible nightmares. George Lutz was being possessed himself by the energy that Ron Defeo left in the house, or perhaps the same energy that was motivating Ron Defeo to kill his entire family. These are the stories. I can't confirm any of this, but what an interesting dynamic that this ghost story begins with a real tragedy, a very real tragedy. So to see that portrayed as a kid, I suppose that seeing that as a kid, like a lot of kids did, that it created an unstable feeling for someone that lived in a home with their family. Number one, that you're vulnerable, that it's not just outside forces, that you could be vulnerable to one of your family members, your eldest brother, that also your house could be invaded by some kind of unexplained phenomena, like a haunting. So I think of all of the horror films I was watching as a kid, and again, I saw the Amityville Horror when I was a child. I was reading through Jay Anson's book when I was a kid. My parents had the book. And so for all of the horror films that I was exposed to as a kid, I think this one truly disturbed me for those aspects, that the absolute destruction of the family from within, and that there is some kind of nefarious force moving it. Now, I don't want to suggest that every family tragedy can be blamed on some kind of unseen force motivating somebody, but perhaps there is. There have been so many unexplained reasons why people do what they do that I think it would only make sense to look into some other force motivating people. You know, science will look into a physiological reason, a chemical imbalance. In the case of Ron Defeo, they would say, well, he was on a massive amount of drugs. His reasoning and decision-making process was clouded. Perhaps. But there are a lot of people taking those same drugs that are not shooting their entire family, and never do. So to look into some other realm for an explanation, if you want to find one, is a possibility. Now, there's all kinds of folklore that surround 112 Ocean Avenue. I've been to the house a few times myself. You know, first as a teen, when I think we drove by it once when I was a kid because I wanted to see it. And it's the aspect of the very real family tragedy that there were 6 murders that happened that night in that house. And to me, that's infinitely more terrifying. Something that scared me when I was a kid, you know, that scene with Rod Steiger in the motion picture where he walks in, he's the father, he's the priest who blessed the house, walks into the house and he hears this deep, demonic voice telling him to get out, screaming at him with all the flies. Now, I'm sure adults that saw it at the time, you know, maybe people thought it was hokey, but or I'm sure some people thought it was ridiculous at the time. But when you're a kid and you first see something like that, it sent chills down my spine. I had nightmares because it opened up the idea that my home could be haunted, and reinforced that idea. And I grew up at a time, and this is all explored in the first quarter of A Haunting We Will Go. You know, I try to explain where I'm coming from with my perspective the best I could, instead of just thrusting us into a haunted location and, you know, trying to take readings and stuff, which there are ghost hunters in A Haunting We Will Go, but I think we have a much better approach to them and more respect for what they're attempting to do. than the usual. So the Amityville Horror House, in many cases, people claim they've debunked it as a hoax. I don't personally support it. I don't believe that it is a hoax at all. Because number one, you're assuming that you know the answer to all of this. Now, after Jay Anson's book came out and the motion picture was made, that title and that movie made a ton of money. And there were people excluded from some of the profits of this story. And they, they wanted their revenge. So of course they're going to say, oh, we made it all up over a bottle of wine. That's what one of their former attorneys who was stiffed on money said about George and Kathy Lutz. But take into consideration that George and Kathy Lutz both passed polygraph tests, that they at least believed that they experienced something. The kids who are now grown, two of which also support that there was a phenomena happening in the house. The Lutzes moved in approximately 1 year later, and George had a deal with the realty company. For an extra $400, he could keep all of the furniture in the house. And so he made that deal. And so all of the original furniture that belonged to the Defeos, including the bed frames that 6 of the family members were murdered in by Butch Defeo, were retained. And of course, there were new mattresses and sheets, but the bed frames themselves. And if you believe that, much like a Civil War battlefield or a murder in any location could leave some kind of metaphysical impression, that I truly believe if there's any explanation, if there's any truth to the haunting regarding the Lutz family, in comparison to virtually no activity allegedly to families that came in and out of that house over the years. But if there's any truth to the Lutz family itself, it must be because, number one, they're the only family that lived there from the time of the Defeo's murder. They moved in 1 year and 1 month later, and they retained all of those items that George Lutz made the deal for, the $400 deal. And now you have a new family settling into this location that was empty after this horrible, brutal, tragic murder that happened the year previous, almost exactly a year. That I think if there was an explanation as to why the Lutz family was the only family that experienced something in that house, it was because of those elements. Because if you compare and contrast to other hauntings, it seems to be that if you're the only group that moved into a location that had activity just before you, or a murder happened there, I don't know if there's some kind of metaphysical cleansing that occurs, that the combination of the ages of the kids might have something to do with it. The Dr. Barry Taff, who was a UCLA parapsychologist in the 70s, he was famous for the Entity case, and he wrote a book called Aliens Above, Ghosts Below. You should check it out when you get a chance. And he discusses some of this phenomena and how he examined it. But it could be certain catalysts in the house. Take into consideration the Lutz family had several young kids. And that could be part of it, the dynamic of George looking somewhat like Ron Defeo. All of this could be some kind of metaphysical spike. And so I take this all into consideration because I do believe that George and Kathy Lutz and family experienced something in that house. And no matter how many times people say, well, it's been debunked, it's like, yeah, but you're hearing voices of very jealous people that didn't make money. Or you're listening to people who lived in there after that claim they had no experience. But we're talking about people who moved in 1 year after people were slaughtered in their beds and sleeping in those exact beds. That particular event was never repeated again. And I wonder if hauntings like this can occur because of certain combinations. They can occur because of the ages of the kids, coupled with the fact that the furniture and the beds were retained, coupled with the fact that it was only 1 year later. These are things to consider in a haunting, because hauntings, the phenomena of a haunting, it's a real thing. Many of us have experienced it. You cannot deny it, and I have no truck with anyone who just says, "Oh, it's all fake," and we just lights out and nothing happens after we die. Listen, there is centuries and millennia of evidence to support otherwise, and millions upon millions, if not billions, of people throughout history that have experienced something. It's their word against yours and your doubt. So keep that in mind. I don't believe every paranormal story that's told to me, not hardly. In fact, I'm very skeptical, especially when people are so cavalier about it, as if they're seeing unicorns and monsters every night. I have a big issue with that person. I don't believe you, and it's not that easy. And if it is, you might as well start showing some evidence, because you're hurting any exploration of the metaphysical, a serious exploration. And I'm not a scientist, but I've read a lot and I've experienced a lot myself. And I've also met with scientists that have tried to explore this phenomena. So in a haunting we will go, taking into consideration how I set you up in the first act, and what I explain and what I went through as a kid, because I feel like we've had a shared experience. I'm not the only person that was affected by the Amityville Horror and ghost stories and horror films, and celebrated that as a kid. Many of you did too, so I feel like we're going on this journey together. But where I do bring you to later in the movie, or in the episode, is an honest metaphysical experiment where ghost hunters and mediums are present, that I feel like if we recreate something where a tragic event happened, which is a home in Tampa, Florida, that someone did die in a particular location, tragically. There was a struggle for life. He was terrified. And many people that have lived in this location since have experienced his ghost. And so I figured to provoke him, or to provoke a phenomena, without being offensive, of course, is to maybe get somebody to be that person in the location. I don't believe they retained any of the furniture, but the structure, the floors and the walls where this man expired, and it was, I would say, quite a violent death, in the home that we explore after, is that this man falls. He hits his head. He bled all over the place. And so I recreated that, and we tried to monitor the situation to see if we were spiking. I think it's a fantastic. I'd like to do more of these, but that was the first one that I attempted, and you'll see it. It's more eventful than just some silly little, fake ghost hunt thing. And again, I'm not calling ghost hunters fake. I have a lot of respect for people that spend time really thinking about this and trying. I've spoken to people like Jesse Lisk and Zach Hino and Barry Taff, of course, and these people are really trying to explore the phenomena of hauntings, and they're getting results. And so I would rather pay attention to these people and work with them to see what they're doing and explore that situation than to just, give a forum to some idiot who just wants to be looked at and talked about and make bags of money for himself. I don't really care. It has nothing to do with me. So I think more creative ways of exploring the unknown, because it remains the unknown. We don't have an answer to it. So anybody that sits and tries to tell you they have the definitive answer as to why all this stuff is happening, they don't. Don't listen to them. They don't know, and there are much more brilliant people that are trying to figure this stuff out, making an attempt. And now that I think the world takes it a little more seriously, or at least is open to understanding that there is a phenomena, together we can explore this further. So I wouldn't I wouldn't rule out phenomena happening in the Amityville house to this day. It could have been lifted, perhaps it was a unique thing that only happened for a short period of time, maybe a year, maybe a little more. I know that Ed and Lorraine Warren, famous demonologists, visited the Amityville house not long after the Lutzes left. And again, the Lutzes were only in the house for 28 days. And then, of course, I think they could have never fathomed the amount of attention that they got for Jay Anson's book or the movie that followed. There was no way to predict that. There was no way to assure or assert that they were going to have great fame by leaving all their belongings after 28 days in the house that they paid good money for. Doesn't make any sense. I would say if your goal was to become famous for something like that, it's quite risky. In fact, you'd be met with more doubt than anything else. But somehow, that story had great impact, and a lot of it all leads back to the tragedy of the Defeo family. I think in the future, I wouldn't rule out me trying something in that house, similar to what I tried in the house in Tampa, Florida, by recreating something in the house and then monitor the situation itself. That house at 112 Ocean Avenue is always going up for sale. And of course, neighbors are sick of people driving by. And their first explanation of it is it was all a hoax. Well, the murders weren't a hoax. There were 6 people tragically murdered in the house. There was a man who murdered them that claimed on 2 occasions at his first trial and before his death that he was hearing voices and that he believes he was demonically possessed. He lied a lot, but I would lean towards that there was some kind of deeper, darker force moving Ron Defeo that dark night to kill his whole family than not. Meditate on that idea for a minute. No matter how many drugs you can do, it's going to require some other level of darkness to push you to shoot your little sisters, your little brothers, your mother, and your father. No matter how many conflicts you've had, you're entering some other zone. You're entering some other plane of pure pitch blackness. And that's something on the metaphysical realm that should be regarded when thinking of anything about the Amityville stories.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
What do you want to do with this?
On December 18th, 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children moved into a house in Amityville, Long Island. 19 days later, they were running for their lives. What happened to them became one of the best-selling books in years and is now a fascinating motion picture, an experience in terror to make you believe in the unbelievable, the Amityville Horror. From American International, rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
It's almost without fail. I'll go back to that original film the first one. There's some aspects of the second Amityville horror movie that regard the Defeo family genuinely, and I think they work. And that Hans Holzer had written a book that was strictly about that, and he changed names and ideas around, but generally that story remained intact. It got into possession and all kinds of crazy stuff with an exorcism at the end of it. Was called Amityville 2, The Possession, but it was literally the story of the Ron Defeo murders. It hasn't 100% been regarded, and I think a tragic story that simply just looks at that story, that could talk about metaphysical effects, but I think they should be more subtle. And I do briefly, I shot movie scenes recreating the murders in A Haunting We Will Go. It's a vignette, but it works, and I wanted it to have impact just for its brief moment in the movie. There's a lot of stuff happening in A Haunting We Will Go, but I needed to talk about this because it really is a seminal ghost story, and certainly the heaviest ghost story that I experienced in fiction before I actually heard my first familial ghost story from my mother. That's also portrayed in A Haunting We Will Go. And we move forward into other things and other experiences that I personally had, and then my own first experience. And then we talk to other people. Genuine Haunted Mansion, the May Stringer House, another home in Tampa, Florida, that's actually owned by my brother and sister-in-law, that they have experienced a variety of phenomena, and they were somewhat reluctant to talk about it in the beginning, and I had to assure them that, you won't be made into a fool. I'm here to just hear your story. My brother maintains that he knows he experienced something, but he doesn't know exactly what it is. And I think the way I'm approaching ghost stories and the way I approach Amityville is the best possible scenario until I have a chance to maybe one day revisit the Amityville story. I have a ton of original ideas and other things I'm going to and want to tackle first. But if I were to visit the Amityville tale outside of A Haunting We Will Go, I would revisit the story of the Defeos in the most respectful way. It's truly a tragic scenario. And if you think about it, and it's nothing to celebrate. But there could be phenomena in that house under the right circumstances. And so I'll forever be curious about it. The house keeps going up for sale. So there is a chance down the road that, maybe I'll make an attempt one day to purchase it. I think it requires a very particular group of people because it's a historical house. No matter how much they try to hide it, cosmetically they changed the infamous windows in the front. It's the only house on the block that's sideways, by the way. And they changed the windows on that side of the house, which is the front of the house, with the hopes that people wouldn't recognize it, but everybody knows where it is. I think they changed the address as well, the actual address number, but it's not going to change anything. Everybody knows where that house is. And I think maybe if people were to regard it as a historical location, not particularly celebrate it, but maybe allow people at certain times to drive by. Maybe they could have a security guard at the end of the block. There's certain days and certain times people could drive by the house. I don't know. It's something that the people of that area in Amityville have to live with forever. It's never going to go away. And hilariously, you can't copyright the title Amityville. So there's been everything from Amityville Bigfoot to the Amityville Vibrator made. And I'm not joking. You can look this up. I've looked at about, 100 different Amityville films. They're unofficial, of course. They're not like studio sequels, but man, people have been devouring that opportunity. So something that's been so done to death, I can see that, people disregarding it as a hoax, but you have to take a few things into consideration. And first of all, the main thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the Defeo tragedy, the entire family murdered, and Ron Defeo being a cold and odd character until his death. You could safely say there was something truly wrong with the man. And of course, who could imagine killing your entire family and then spending the rest of your life in prison? He was a pathological liar. I don't know what his motivations were for changing his story over and over. And there are things that he made up that were immediately debunked in terms of other people being involved and his sister killing the family, then his mother killing the family. That story changed over and over again. And I've run into people, they always they'll pick one of those explanations that Ron Defeo had and lay that down as the finite explanation for all of this. And I don't think you'll ever have a finite explanation for it. But if I were to sit here and explain what happened, I think the most sensible explanation would be Ron Defeo was an open door for a nefarious force. I believe in nefarious forces that motivate people, and that I think someone who is addicted, someone who is already angry, someone who is already committing crimes, had an open channel to be motivated. It doesn't make sense that this man consciously said, I'm going to kill my whole family for insurance money. It doesn't make sense at all. Of course, he was picked up and he was the immediate suspect. There was no way he was getting away with this. And I'm sure he was at the very least sharp enough to understand that. There was something else motivating him. When I hear about murders that are like this, and there have been, I grew up with a story of a guy who killed his son and his wife with a baseball bat and then killed himself on the railroad tracks. What brings you to that point? You can't just say it's a temper. I've known people with tempers. They do have limits. There's something else. There's something else, I think, that motivates people. And I'm not sure if we'll ever have proof, but I wonder if, at the very least, it could be discovered that there are other motivations happening. If you believe in demons or demonic possession or even just nefarious energies, almost like parasites, parasitic energies. They've been written about in fiction. H.P. Lovecraft wrote about them. And of course, they're talked about in folklore and religious documents and tomes. That there is some kind of cosmic energy that latches on to people, something that exists parallel to us, that maybe there are these metaphysical parasites that latch on to people and they amplify anger, they amplify what ended up in that Defeo house. And also, I've spoken to people that go to a lot of haunted locations. I've been to quite a few myself, allegedly haunted locations. Alcatraz was one of them. I felt an extreme amount of energy coming out of that place. And that's a tourist location. People are in and out of that place, but, you could see the scars on the concrete. And I sat in a solitary cell and, just opened my mind to just feel something there. And again, I think the greatest haunting is in the mind. That old statement that it's just my imagination. Well, there's something to that. There's something deeper to that. Your imagination is not just playing tricks on you. It might inspire a phenomena. And that, I think, when we're kids, we're conduits for that. That's why we have nightmares. That's why kids watch these horror films like I did. And there is no way I was going to sleep that night. First night I saw the Amityville Horror, wow. Feeling vulnerable, I can't even define it that way. I believed 100% in hauntings after seeing that movie. When I was a kid, if you were in your 20s and you saw it, may have had a very different experience, but a 5-year-old kid seeing that changes you. You are now inside a house. Now you're seeing your home differently. You're seeing your family differently. You're not worried about the outside forces that concern the normal person living in a neighborhood. Someone breaking into your home in the middle of the night. Didn't even cross my mind. What really crossed my mind was, what's in here? What's in this house? The basement seemed very different to me as a kid after that. And then I read the book Stephen King's It, and it was confirming, wow, other people have the same fear. We had this very spooky cellar growing up in my home. And it seems that there's an energy to things, that perhaps our imagination can conjure things. Perhaps traumas can conjure things into reality. Perhaps we have a control over that we can manifest certain things. And I think if you want to explore the unknown, all of these concepts need to be taken into consideration. That a poltergeist activity, or even a haunting, in some cases at the very least, can be a manifestation of something that's happening in your mind. I'm not trying to simplify it to just simply imagination, but we might have the power to open up a doorway with our minds, with manifestation. You could essentially manifest some bad things into your world. That level of thinking, I think, it's going to be near impossible to get to all the answers, okay? But getting closer to some kind of explanation to what all of this is, I think you have to think on a higher, more complicated level. And if you were to try any kind of metaphysical, quantum, or scientific experiment to try and replicate these situations, it would have to be done on that level. So, if I were to attempt something in the Amityville house, I suppose I would recreate that night. Of course, nobody's going to get hurt, but if we could recreate that entire scenario closest to the way it happened, of course, without anyone getting hurt, and then seeing how everyone feels. I did this exact experiment in a haunting we will go, not at the Amityville house, but at another haunted location where another tragedy happened. I would use the same technique in the Amityville house. And then, of course, we would monitor it with every possible device we could. But it would never... I have no interest in pretending for an audience. I want to actually try these things. Let's try a variety of things. I brought in a Robin Wind, who is a trance medium who suggests that the spirit of deceased human beings or others are entering her and speaking through her. So in a haunting we will go, you will see what happened with Robin while we had this seance, and she claimed that Mr. Everett, who was the man that lived and died tragically in that house, is speaking through her. I cannot confirm whether it's real or not, but I believe Robin is sincere about her experiences. I certainly believe people experienced a variety of things in that house that they have no finite explanation for. It's coming along so well. I can't wait to share this with you. The schedule for Off to the Witch, for those of you who don't know, has changed just a little bit. There is an off week now, but on those off weeks, I take an older episode and I upload it to the YouTube channel. For the regular listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and so on and so forth, there'll just be an off week. Next week is an off week. But if you want to go on over to the YouTube channel and check out an older episode with a live chat, that will happen on the regular time slot Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. In any other arena, if you haven't listened, we have well over 100 episodes now. Backtrack and listen to those if you've missed them. And if you've been a regular listener, I thank you for joining us. The podcast isn't going away. There's a great evolution coming forward later in the year, but right now I have to finish A Haunting We Will Go, and I'm also completing the second chapter And that's going to go into post-production just after A Haunting We Will Go is finished editing. On top of that, I have a network miniseries that is now in pre-production. And so there's a ton of work coming, but the greatest thing that is going to happen is that Off to the Witch will expand. The brand is going to expand. There's going to be many more of these Off to the Witch Presents documentaries up ahead. I have so many planned. And the reason why I chose to do this outside of the network system, this particular project, is that I wanted full creative control and final cut. Well, even the greatest of all filmmakers in the world have to fight for stuff like that. And I was just, after my experience on Strange World, and I'm proud of what we did on Strange World, but I feel like it was only about 65, 70% of my final vision. And it doesn't matter to me the difference in budget, and you won't see it either. I have the capabilities of making these things, and I know what to do. And the new show is the best thing I've made. I'm really happy with it, and I'm happy to now make it evolve. I have about 5 new episodes planned forthcoming. They're all different from each other. I say it's essentially what I had originally pitched Strange World as, even though I'm happy with what Strange World was in the end. This new series is better. And you'll probably see 1 or 2 of these a year, probably 2 as we go a little further. Next year, I'll be working with a bigger crew, and so we'll make at least 2 of these a year. But it's not about quantity, it's about quality. I want you to celebrate each chapter. I want you to be able to revisit them. And they're being made with the utmost respect for the medium, and trying to push boundaries too as to where these things go. That's not something you can do quick. This isn't a YouTube video. YouTube is designed for people that make things very fast. Well, motion picture filmmaking and documentary movie making isn't that. And I see these quickie docs or whatever the hell they are being made very fast and thrown together, but they're typical and they're a waste of time in my opinion. I'm making something that you're going to watch certainly more than once, that's going to leave an impression on you, and that I am doing this for the audience. I'm doing it for me too, but I'm doing this for the audience because I want to make something that lasts, something that's strong. Throughout all of the forthcoming projects I have in my life, I will always make these as long as I'm interested. And there are many adventures to have, and it feels good to be in full control of it. And you'll see the result. You know, the result is that it's going to be a better show for it. Making these shows, the future of this, will be done by people that care about quality over quantity. And I'm about to prove that. I'll be one of the people that prove it forthcoming. So this fall, A Haunting We Will Go will be released. And it'll be the very first chapter of Off to the Witch Presents, the first chapter of many. And every episode's going to be different. And I won't lie to you. And I'm not going to assert that I know the answers, nor will I promise you evidence via a false cliffhanger, okay? Because that's what all of these shows do. So expect a very different series, but something infinitely more exciting than anything you can get anywhere else. And I'll stand by that, and I'm confident in this new series, and that it will make a new example and hopefully inspire other people to kind of dig deeper into their imagination and their ability. Push your ability, you know, if you're making these things. Come on, you have every opportunity. Nobody's holding your hand. Nobody's holding you back. Nobody's guiding your hand on the canvas. Push yourself. Make something fresh. You know, we love these things. And so these documentaries and these movies should be made with that same love. Otherwise, it becomes tedious. And I think ultimately it just depletes people's inspiration. And that's the last thing I want to do. I'll never do that. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. Hope you enjoyed my rant about Amityville and my meditations on it. It's something that I'm eternally fascinated by and haunted by. This story has haunted me since I was a kid. And perhaps one day I'll enter that house and maybe we'll try the experiment that I mentioned. So I've got to get back to work. I want to finish A Haunting We Will Go in a timely manner and have a great release, a proper release for it. It deserves it. And busy also with this other project, and so I will see you again the week after next. And if you want to, join us on the YouTube channel next Wednesday for an older episode, and I'll be there visiting the chat if you want to say hello. Otherwise, the following week, we'll have a new guest and a new episode, and I wish you well and take care.